Similarly, Kuching is the only sword character whose charge attack costs 25 stamina instead of 20. Similarly, Heizo is the only catalyst user whose charge attack costs 25 stamina instead of 50. Catalyst characters generally can't mine ores, but some of them can. As long as they have a blunt attack, it can damage ores. Riesli, Klee, and Ningguang are best at it, but Yanfei also works. Child and Goro are bow characters that can mine ore due to how their kits work, but I wouldn't recommend mining with them in the first place because it's quite slow. Technically, all bow characters can mine ore by plunging, but I mean by using their kits. Starglow Cavern and Salteray don't have an underground map, even though they updated underground maps in other regions. When they added underground maps in other regions, they probably just didn't care about Mondstadt or Liyue, so if you go to these areas again, you will not see an underground map. I guess they didn't find it important enough, like giving us more Primogems. In Sumeru and Fontaine, you can tell if there's a Shrine of Death on the map by looking for a star pattern. This is probably not very useful if you're using an interactive map, but it's still a cool detail. The other regions don't have it because I'm assuming it was only added after Sumeru, so if you try this in any other nation, you won't see it. In Dragonspine, you can infinitely farm Crimson Agates as long as you don't max out your Frostbearing tree. As long as you never max this out, you can continue doing Crimson Wishes, which allows you to collect Crimson Agates. This comes at the cost of having access to the Dragonspine glider, but I also do think it's pretty funny when you stack hundreds of Crimson Agates in your inventory. You cannot use the Animal Treasure. You can infinitely farm Crimson Agates as long as you don't max out your Frostbearing tree. As long as you never max this out, you can continue doing Crimson Wishes, which allows you to collect Crimson Agates. This comes at the cost of having access to the Dragonspine glider, but I also do think it's pretty funny when you stack hundreds of Crimson Agates in your inventory. You cannot use the Animal Treasure Compass in Dragonspine even though it's part of Mondstadt. In other nations, sub-regions allow you to use the Treasure Compass with their respective nation. I don't know, Dragonspine hates all of you. Liyue is the only region with an equal amount of 4 and 5 stars. If Inazuma, Sumeru, and Fontaine were to introduce a single 4-star in their respective nations, it would create the same balance as Liyue. We won't talk about Mondstadt though because there's a huge imbalance there. Eula currently holds the record for the longest banner gap, which was from 2.4 all the way until 3.8. This was 27 banners in total. Just wow. On the other hand, Yoimiya currently holds the record for the shortest banner gap, which was from 2.8 to 3.2, with it only being 4 banners. I think Hoyoverse has a favorite child. Speaking of favorite child, Yoimiya is the only non-Archon that has an Act 2 story quest. It's interesting to see how she got one before Venti did. I think it's also safe to assume that a character receiving an Act 2 quest is random, and it's not exclusive to Archons. Unless you count Yoimiya as a Pyro Archon. I know I certainly do. Hydro has the least amount of 4 stars, only having 3. Barbara, Xingqiu, and Candace. Although I suppose you can count Xingqiu as a 5-star, so only 2, if you believe hard enough. It has become increasingly more difficult to obtain Amber, Kaya, and Lisa since their release in 1.0. This is because every new 4-star character gets thrown into the standard pool, which ends up diminishing the chance of you obtaining any of these 3 characters. If you're trying to C6 either Amber, Kaya, or Lisa, your best bet is to buy them from the monthly shop at Star Glitter. If you pull in the standard banner, you're built different. Fontaine is the only nation so far to have a statue of 7 in its main city. All the other nations don't have a statue of 7 in their main city. No 4-star characters ascend with either crit rate or crit damage. I guess Hoyoverse doesn't want 4-star characters to be on par with some 5-stars if they were to ascend with either of those stats. Or probably just because they don't want 4-stars to be as good as 5-stars. Who knows? Noelle is the only character who ascends with defense percentage. No other character in the game ascends with this stat. But who knows, maybe this will change once more Geo characters get released after we've been waiting 7 years. Yaimiko has the longest elemental burst cooldown in the game, being 22 seconds. She and Raiden are the only characters whose burst also costs 90 energy to cost, being the highest in the game. It's a powerful elemental burst, so it checks out. Barbara is the only 4-star character who has a 5-star elemental burst animation. Her elemental burst is also the only one in the game that does no damage at all. Well, I suppose that's not entirely true. Xiao's doesn't either. He's more useless than Barbara. No matter where you go in Genshin, you will always find that 1 4-second plant, Mint. The only exception is the Chasm Underground, which has no mint anywhere. Mint is actually so common that even Enkanomiya has it. How fascinating. Excluding the Traveler, Cyno, and Razor are the only male Electro characters. This makes Electro have the lowest male to female ratio out of all of the elements. There are 3 pairs of characters who share a birthday, Lynette and Linny being February 2nd, for obvious reasons, Ito and Paimon, June 1st, which is pretty funny since they share something else aside from their birthday, and Klee and Shinobu, July 27th. This one is probably just a coincidence. I can't really think of a reason why it would be the same. Probably just, they're just both July 27. Kaya is a pretty unique character in the sense that he's the only one who's been in an Archon quest, has his own story quest, has his own hangout, and also has his own skin. No other character has met these conditions. 2 things about Kale. 1, she is wearing Amber's headband on her back, which is flipped upside down, and 2, her vision also has Amber's headband on it. These are small details that show you that she really did respect Amber before she moved to Sumeru. Weapon size scales with specific characters. For example, Sayu wielding a claymore is smaller when compared to Diluc. Pretty small detail, but Sayu wielding a claymore is smaller when compared to Diluc. Pretty small detail, but it'd be pretty funny if the weapon size remained consistent between characters. Imagine Sayu carrying a really big claymore. Riesli is the only character with black hair. I'm not sure why, but we'll leave it at that. The 5-star Mondstadt weapon series is the only collection of weapons that has a weapon of each type. They are all also on the standard banner, although they do tend to cycle as featured weapons every now and then. When you defeat fungi monsters, the type of drop they yield depends on whether you hit them with Electro or Pyro. If you didn't hit them with either of those elements, they only drop spores. If you did hit them with either Electro or Pyro, they can also drop nuclei, and the rate of dropping spores decreases. When Sumeru was introduced, you can burn or activate star shrooms with Pyro or Electro, resulting in either an activated or burned star shroom, depending on which element you used. However, prior to Sumeru's release, the Chasm Underground had star shroom. You cannot change the ones that are in the Chasm Underground since the mechanic wasn't implemented until later. There aren't that many skins in Genshin, but most of them have been free. Only the 4-star skins that belong to 4-star characters have been free in previous events. The other ones require you to spend money. I also think it's safe to assume that all 4-star skins that belong to 4-star characters will be free in the future, as long as you participate in the event associated with it. The most difficult artifact piece to get is an Elemental Mastery Goblet. When you receive a goblet from any source, you only have a 2.5% chance for it to be Elemental Mastery, which is quite low. You can think of it as gacha within a gacha game. That's pretty much what it is. Will be free in the future, as long as you participate in the event associated with it. The most difficult artifact piece to get is an Elemental Mastery Goblet. When you receive a goblet from any source, you only have a 2.5% chance for it to be Elemental Mastery, which is quite low. You can think of it as gacha within a gacha game. That's pretty much what it is. Sword characters are currently the most common out of the entire roster. As of 4.2, there are 17 sword characters, 18 if you count the Traveler. Aggravate and Spread do the same thing. They both deal bonus damage when attacking a monster affected with the Quicken status, with either Electro or Dendro. The only difference is that Spread has a slightly higher multiplier with its base damage, being 1.25x compared to Electro's 1.15x. You probably won't notice this that much, but Dendro characters tend to hit harder when triggering these reactions. It costs 7,048,000 Mora to max the character out completely, which is quite a lot. If you're ever feeling lazy for the day, I recommend doing gold ley lines. Your Mora count will add up gradually, and leveling up characters won't seem that expensive if you have a lot of Mora. 1.0 was the only version without a flagship event, so there was no free 4-star from an event. The game had a ton of content on release, so it makes sense as to why. Archon 1.0 was the only version without a flagship event, so there was no free 4-star from an event. The game had a ton of content on release, so it makes sense as to why. Archons always have their first rerun 4 patches after the patch they were released on. For example, Venti released in 1.0 and had its first rerun in 1.4. So if you missed Arena in 4.2, she will return in 4.6. Prior to Sumeru's release, Dendro text used to be very light green, but I guess they decided to change it to a darker type of green. Dendro text used to be very light green, but I guess they decided to change it to a darker type of green. I'm not really sure why, but the Dendro color that we all know is the color they decided to go with. If you haven't done the Fontaine Archon quest, Farina's profile will say 3 question marks instead of Vision or Gnosis. This is due to the Archon quest, which I won't spoil, but it's cool how they added this small detail. According to some math geniuses, when pulling on a character banner, it is almost impossible to hit 90 pity exactly due to how the pity system works. Getting to 89 pity without hitting a 5-star is incredibly rare, which probably won't ever happen to you. If it does happen to you, then that just means Hoyoverse has taken it to